at it. Okay, so the last part of international that we have to talk about are barriers to trade. Now, you guys have seen these graphs. These are just supply and demand graphs from our markets. And this is domestic. Get my quantity in there. And then this is for the foreign goods. So this could be cars, clothing, wine, it could be anything. We have a domestic market and we have a foreign market. So what we do with the world market is we basically put these two together into one market. Now, we have a world price that you see right here. This is the world price. And what happens in reality is that this world price is then put against the markets that we have here. So this is our PW and this is our PW. So here the price is lower than the domestic market, and you can see in the world there's a shortage right here. But in the foreign market, the world price is higher than the domestic, and they have a little bit of a surplus here. And this right here is our shortage. So when we come to our world market, the demand for the world market is made up of these shortages that are in the domestic market. And the supply in the world market is made up of the surpluses from some domestic market. In the case that I'm showing here, the surpluses are coming from other countries. And so that's what's going to make up the supply. Right? Now, when we put these two together, we're actually going to look at the domestic along with the world. Now, before I get into the barriers, we need to know, like, what are they and why are they? So we have several different types. Whoopsie. We have several different types of barriers. We have tariffs, quotas, embargoes, standards, and subsidies are the main types. Now, embargoes are not economic based, neither are standards. So our standards are usually health related, safety issues. Embargoes are usually more political. So our economic barriers to trade are the tariffs. We've talked about those. Those are taxes on imported goods. Quotas, those are a limit. They're saying you can only import, 100 tons of whatever. And then subsidies are actually the subsidies are for the domestic. So for jets, we have Airbus and Boeing. Airbus is a European company, and they are actually subsidized, and that's considered a barrier to trade because the subsidy is going to cause their goods to be relatively less expensive. Right? And if you guys have questions along the way, you can put them into the chat, or somebody who's online could ask for you. All right.
Could you repeat the part about the subsidies?
Yes. So subsidies are considered a barrier to trade because what they're doing is the domestic government is going to subsidize that firm. And when we subsidize a firm, remember that increases their supply because it lowers the cost of production. So the barrier is that a government is allowing a firm these subsidies, which will lower their cost of production. So it makes them more competitive. Now, the people who benefit from trade restrictions are usually the businesses and the workers that produce those products. What you're going to see is when we have a barrier to trade, it's going to increase the world price so that the domestic firms can produce more. And when the domestic produces more, they hire more workers. And the people who bear the cost or who are hurt by the trade restrictions are going to be the consumers, because we are now going to be paying higher prices and we will have less variety. They're also what we call the import industry. The import industry is separate from the actual goods and services. So on yesterday's sheet, you guys saw that the shipper that was bringing the BMWs to the United States, they are actually part of the import industry. Because they are the ones that are helping to facilitate the trade, bringing the goods and services into the country. So when we place a barrier to trade, these import industries are harmed because we'll import less because of the higher prices. So they will have less production, they'll hire less workers in that import industry. And then obviously the foreign producers and workers are also harmed or bear the cost of this, because they will not be selling as many of their products in our market. And Connor, I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up when people are ready for me to go to the next page. Okay. Now, why, what are the rationale for barriers to trade? The one thing I'm going to tell you right now, every economist is going to tell you that no barriers of trade is best for an economy. It helps us to produce at the least cost, as we saw with our comparative and absolute advantage, and it gives customers the lowest. But there are going to be some economies and governments who will have reasons or rationale for their barriers. One of them is military self-sufficiency. This is the idea that if we had to go to war, we wouldn't want anybody to know our military secrets and whatnot. The US government, in fact, has restrictions on who is allowed to help produce their military equipment. One argument is to increase domestic employment. You saw that in my who benefits from the restrictions from trade is that the domestic producers will produce more and therefore will be able to hire more workers. The third is called an infant industry. And it is exactly what it sounds like. An infant is something, like a newborn, like just starting out. So if we have an industry that is just creating or being created in the domestic environment, then they might lobby to say, hey, can you please protect us so that we can grow and be more competitive? Another is diversification for stability. So when we talked about that idea of comparative advantage, there may be an economy who wants to diversify. So just in case something happens in the world, that they would still be able to produce those items. The fifth one is called protection against dumping. Now, dumping is not trash. Dumping is when a company or a foreign industry loads our market with below cost items, so that we have no way of competing with them because they're putting it out into the market at such a low cost. And then cheap foreign labor argument is that idea of, you've heard arguments about, sweatshops in third world countries, that we want to protect against that. So if we increase the price, we can hire more of our own domestic. So I really think that these two right here, the increasing employment, and I think these two are kind of connected. Do you guys have any questions about the rationale behind barriers to trade?
Could you repeat the part about infant industry?
Yeah, so infant industry, sorry about that. An infant industry is an industry that's just being created. So an example, like 10, 15 years ago, the cell phone industry, right? We had no cell phones. We just had those landlines that were connected to the wall or to a wire. So that industry that was just starting out, the research and development, that's called an infant industry. So a government might want to protect that industry to let it grow so that it could be more competitive with the international scene. So we'll put trade barriers to protect that industry until it is old enough to compete. Okay. Are you guys ready to see what the graph looks like? Okay. Now, if, I think I saw Tarina over there, there should be some worksheets in the folder that I gave to the sub. Okay, if Tarina could start passing those out, you'll need it for the next page that I get to. Yeah. Yep, that's it. That's it. Okay, now that worksheet that Connor just showed me, you guys aren't gonna need for right now. You're gonna need it in a minute. So do you remember I told you from the first page that we're gonna take that world supply, that's this black one right here, I'm gonna kind of sit down. Right, this is the one I created by taking the surpluses from one country or many countries and the shortages of another. And this one right here is our domestic demand curve. So why we put these two together is because we want to know how much the domestic industry will provide and how much will be imported by the rest of the world. So right now, by looking at this figure, do you see at the world price right here that it does not intersect? Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so if you can see right now at this world price, the domestic demand curve is not intersecting that price at all. So right now in this industry, we are importing the entire amount. So QW right here is gonna all be imported. So the government steps in more than likely because the industry has lobbied for them to step in. And this is what a quota looks like. So this was the original domestic demand, I'm sorry, domestic supply. And now when I put the quota in, you'll see that the world has shifted. So now P1 is the new world price. And you can see we went from 0 production in the domestic to now we are going to be producing at Q2. Let me show you this right here. So the amount supplied domestically before the quota was none. The amount imported was the QW. Once the quota has been put in place, and remember the quota is saying we're going to limit how much the countries can sell in our domestic environment. That's going to increase our world price. And now the domestic is going to be able to supply Q2. Does anyone, through Connor, can anybody tell me what the imported amount would be after the quota?
Mic is on, so hopefully she can hear.
Q3.
Someone said Q3.
There's no Q3 up there. Okay, let's take this a step at a time. We're at P1. We know that Q2 is going to be supplied domestically. How much is demanded domestically? Right? We're going to go from that price over to the demand. And we can see that Q1 is demanded, but only Q2 is being supplied domestically. So how much is going to be imported?
Someone said Q2 minus Q1.
Okay, so let's just reverse it and let's get the bigger number first.
Oh, sorry. No, they said Q1 minus Q2. I said it wrong.
It's okay, you got the right numbers. Okay, so when we decide, when we're looking for how much is being imported, we want to go from the domestic demand, and then we're going to subtract what's going to be supplied domestically. Now, the one thing I want to remind you guys, as you guys are kind of graphing these, remember that when I give you a supplier demand curve, you are not allowed to extend it. So on that first graph where PW did not intersect the domestic supply curve, we can't extend it. Because this right here is the lowest price that they would be willing to supply it, and we're below that. All right. Now, quotas are a limit. So what do you think the difference between a quota and a tariff is? No one?
Isn't a tariff like a tax?
Exactly.
And a quota is-
So this is a tax. And why that's important is because this is going to generate revenue. The quota only limits the amount coming in. So the only people who are going to benefit from this are the producers and their workers. Where a tariff still is going to benefit the producers and their workers, but it's also going to benefit the domestic government because the domestic government will be able to use these taxes for some of their programs. Now, that's really the only difference, because when you look at the graph, it's going to look almost exactly the same. Look at graph A. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Graph A, I just cut and pasted from my quota graph and I changed it to world with tariff. It looks exactly the same. The only difference is we are now going to be able to show a tariff. We're going to be able to find this tax. Now this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this should match the worksheet that you got at the beginning of the class. Thank you. Okay, so you guys won't have to draw any of this. It should already be there. We're just going to go through and read it. So on graph A, what is the quantity the domestic producer will supply after the tariff has been levied? So in group A, we're going to go to this P1. When you guys are looking to find quantities, always go over to the price first. Find out what price is going to be charged and then go from there. So P1 is going to be our price after the tariff. So then I'm going to go to the domestic supply curve and come down and find out that that's going to be Q2. On graph B, this is a little bit of a different graph. This one is an upward sloping supply curve for the world, where this one is horizontal. This one right here is probably the one you're going to see most often, because it's showing that at the world price, the rest of the world, all the other countries will be able to supply what we need. So on that graph, the quantity that's imported after the tariff is levied is also going to be Q2. Because these two world prices are exactly the same. I'm just showing you it in different models. On graph A, what is the quantity imported if the economy is open and no trade barriers? So open and no trade barriers is going to be coming back down to the PW. This is the same situation that we had with the quota. PW does not intersect the domestic supply curve. So they are going to import all of that quantity. And you'll notice on graph B, it's going to be the same. Now, I'm not asking how much would be imported here, although I could, it's gonna be exactly the same as it would be in our quota. The reason that I want you guys to look at these two graphs is to make sure that you're aware of how they're the same and how they're different. We're still looking at what's the world price. We're looking at where does it intersect the domestic supply to determine the domestic production. And then we're gonna look at the differences between the domestic supply and the world supply to get the amount imported. Now, the last part here that's a little different is the per unit tariff and then shading in the tariff revenue or the tax revenue. We've actually, this is very, very similar to what we did when we talked about the taxes in micro. So what we're going to do in order to figure out this per unit tariff is we're going to go to where the domestic demand intersects the new price or that new supply, right? So I'm going to go right here to the supply with world. And what you guys want to remember is these shifts in the supply curve when we're working with taxes, it is a parallel vertical shift that is in the amount of the tax. So in this graph right here, my per unit tariff goes from the new world supply with tariff down to the old world supply. So our per unit tariff here is going to be P1 minus P2. An extension question, which I didn't ask on this worksheet, would be, what is the tariff, the revenue generated by the tariff? And that's going to be this box right here. The per unit tariff times the amount imported. That's the Q1 minus Q2. And this box would represent the tax revenue, or I'm sorry, tariff revenue. Someone give me a thumbs up that you guys are okay for me to go to graph B. Okay. On graph B, we're going to do exactly the same thing. All right, we're going to go to the domestic demand where it intersects the world with tariff. And then we're going to go down to the other supply curve. All right, this is going to be my per unit tariff. So now it's going to be P1 minus PW. I'm going to go and find my imported amount and create that box. And this will be the revenue generated by the tariff. Now guys, I want to take just a minute for you guys to look at this. I want you to recognize that I've paralleled these graphs. So the PW in graph A is the same PW that's in graph B. The P1 in graph A is the same P1 in graph B. Okay, so they're the same. You need to understand that it's always the vertical distance between the two world supply curves. We're not stopping at PW in this graph. The amount of the tariff is the entire amount. Connor, you're making me dizzy. Oh, I can see everybody now. That was genius, Connor. Although, Connor, there we go. If Connor unmutes himself.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Do you guys have any questions on this graph? All right, are you ready to flip over to the next page? Yeah. Okay, so this one is much more like the second graph, graph B that we did. When country A engages in world trade without barriers, what is the quantity of good that's imported? Now, remember what I told you. Always find the price first. So we're going without trade barriers. So we're going to go to this supply curve to find that it's 120 pounds. So to find the amount that's imported, we go to the domestic supply. And then we have to find out what the domestic demand is at that price. So my domestic supply is right here. At that price, the domestic demand is here. So the amount imported is going to be 60 minus 20, which is going to give us, oops, don't forget that 40 million. Okay. So for some of you guys, this is going to be a reminder. For others, it's going to be new. What is the consumer surplus in the market for country A? So remember that the consumer surplus is the difference between what they're willing to pay. That's our demand curve. And what they actually pay, which is right here. Change this color. Okay, so pink is what they're actually paying. The demand curve is what they're willing to pay. So this triangle that I just created is going to be your consumer surplus for country A. So that calculation, because it's a triangle, is going to be 1/2. 3.2 minus 1.2. And then we're going to go 60 million. So I'm pretty sure 3.2 minus 1.2 is 2 times 1/2. So our answer is going to be 60 million. Are we good? Those of you who are in line of the camera, give me a thumbs up so I can see. Okay. So then our producer surplus is the difference between what they were willing to receive. That's our supply curve. And what they actually received, which again is that pink line. So this little triangle right here is going to be the producer surplus in country A. We can't address the producer surplus for the rest of the world. We can only do it for the domestic market. So that's another triangle. So it's going to be 1/2. This is going to be 1.2 minus 0.6. And then this is times 20 million. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's 6 million. Thank you, Jessica. All right. When country A engages in world trade after imposing the 40, this was supposed to be 40.4 pounds because I wasn't in dollars. The quantity of goods imported is. So we're no longer at this 120. We've now come up to here. I'm going to give you guys just a minute to see if you can come up with that before I give you. All right. Remember that we always find the price first. So with that 40.4 pound tariff, we're at 160. So I'm going to go to that domestic supply and then domestic demand. And I'm going to see that this is going to be 50 mil minus 30 mil. So now we are only going to be importing 20 million. How much revenue did the tariff generate? Well, remember, they actually already told us that it was 0.4. And it's this box right here. And guys, try to remember that a tariff, a tax, we always find the revenue the same way. the amount of the per unit tax or tariff times that quantity. Well, it's not on the 30 million and it's not on the 50 million. It's only on what is being imported. So I'm gonna take that 0.4 and I'm gonna multiply it by my 20 million. And I'm gonna get 8 million pounds. All right. Now, this last part, I think, is actually the hardest thing on here, because it's kind of a funky thing. Now, I'm gonna clear some of this stuff so I can show it to you a little bit better. See. Okay. So our consumer surplus was this pink area here. That was our original consumer. And then our original producer was here. Okay, so this is what we're thinking of as kind of the gain from trade, right? We're gonna have a bigger consumer surplus, maybe a smaller producer surplus. So when I increased that world price because of the tariff, some things changed. This became revenue for the government, right? This was our tax revenue. Our consumer surplus is now going to be this. Let me go to this color. Right, is now going to be this area here. So where you see orange and pink, it's keeping, right? Our producer surplus is now going to be here. All right. Need that pink because that was part of my original consumer surplus. Do you guys notice that there are two areas that are not shaded twice? They're only shaded the first time. So we have a loss of this triangle and this triangle. That is going to be the net loss to country A. It was a loss in their consumer surplus. So that's two triangles, which is going to be 1/2 0.4 30 minus 20. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't show this much work, but I want you guys to know where I'm getting these two triangles from. So this 30 minus 20 is this triangle here, and the 60 minus 50 is this triangle here. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's 4 million. Are we good? Excellent. All right, I know the bell's going to ring shortly, and I'm just going to show you the subsidies real quick. I am going to tell you that you are not going to have to draw these graphs. Okay, they are going to like start you out. You might have to make a shift to show, but you're not going to have to draw them from scratch. So a subsidy looks a little bit different in that I know this is very overwhelming. Excuse me. I know this is very overwhelming, but with a subsidy, I'm giving the subsidy to the domestic. So you're going to see that both the domestic supply is going to shift. And guys, try to remember that this world is the domestic plus the foreign. So if the domestic shifts, the world also has to shift. And you can see that that subsidy is going to lower the price, but because domestically we're being subsidized, you will see that they will now be able to produce. Thank you to that, to whoever said, God bless you. Okay. Any questions? Okay, you guys feel good about the lesson? You have just officially finished all of economics, both micro and macro. Yay! All right, there'll be a couple little fixes that we'll do after spring break, but what we're headed for here is you guys should have finished the worksheet. I will had a little trouble last night with my connection, so I will be posting the answers to that second balance of payment worksheet that I gave you guys yesterday. All those answers will be posted. You should be focused on tonight doing the AP progress check. And I will also have some FRQs ready for you guys. All right, so we'll have just review on Monday, Tuesday, test on Wednesday, and then Thursday is a day of forgiveness where you guys can beg me to have some reassessments or whatnot. The begging should occur on Monday and Tuesday, by the way, not on Thursday. And if you guys have any questions for me, you can go ahead and email me and I'll be happy to answer.
Bye.
Have a good week.